Good evening, vlog viewers. As much as I would like to have my second vlog be about something innocent and happy, like how I just made chocolate chip cookie bars for the first time, or how I've been distracting myself reading Harry Potter, which is an excellent series, by the way, and you should all join me in that adventure. I feel the need to talk about the recent racial injustice in our country. This week has been so reminiscent of the 1960s civil rights movement or the Vietnam War protests, and we are living in history. I think it's worth writing about and talking about, even though it's uncomfortable and controversial. It's something that causes so much pain in our country. And so I wrote a speech, and I hope it encourages you or challenges you in some way. I'm tired, confused, and angry. I feel a little helpless. My husband just went out to the Capitol to join the protests. I wanted so badly to go with him, but I was scared and felt conflicted. I'm just so emotional and frustrated by the whole thing that I decided tonight my time was best spent writing. It's true that I'm sitting on the sidelines tonight while he goes and plays the activist role, but I'd like to think that words are just as powerful as joining a protest. I'd like to think that it's okay to say no to a protest one night and trust that my writing and prayers can still make an impact. So on the one hand, I have my white friends telling me how I should empathize with the police officers who have a hard time in this country as they face all of the riots, and that there are just a few bad apples. On the other hand, I have my black friends expressing how deeply hurt and angry they are at everything. Angry that blacks get treated so differently on a daily basis in this country. Angry that police officers can abuse their power without as harsh of consequences. Angry that they feel the need to constantly justify experiences because the average American doesn't think racism is still a by and large issue. Angry that the riots are distracting from the real issue at hand, namely systematic racism in this country. While I agree that there are plenty of good cops out there, that doesn't negate the main issue at hand. There's simply not strict enough enforcement for the bad cops that do exist. As the saying goes, a few bad apples spoil the bunch. While I don't think all cops are racist, I think policy and political changes need to occur to prevent systemic racism from continuing to take the lives of innocent black and brown citizens of this country. We aren't protesting because we hate cops. We are protesting because all cops, good and bad, need more accountability so that the abuse of power does not continue. How many more black men and women have to die until policies change? That's why I pray, mirroring the 1960s civil rights movement, the protests continue until change occurs. I used to think that our country was relatively fair and that our justice system guaranteed justice would be served to murderers and those whose abuse was caught. But now I'm starting to question that assumption. Is the justice system truly just as fair to a black as to a white person? Does the justice system guarantee that police officers who abuse their power get proper punishment? Why wasn't the police officer who murdered George Floyd arrested immediately? Why did firing him precede arresting him? Why were the other cops who passively stood by not in handcuffs at all? Why are cops suddenly allowed to arrest journalists in the protest streets and charge them for unlawful assembly? Hold up. Why is it suddenly unlawful to assemble for any citizen, let alone a journalist? Since when did our rights as Americans get taken away by the very people charged with enforcing the law? What we are seeing here amidst the racism, murder, abuse of power, riots, and protests is not a cops versus black people problem. What we are seeing is a pollution of justice, and what we are asking for is a basic restoration of our government as a nation. I want to see a nation in which there's a governing group to hold police officers accountable. I want to see a nation in which black men and women feel safe to walk in their neighborhoods without fearing death. I want to see a nation whose first response is utter horror and lament at the murdering of an innocent man, even more than the riots which resulted in response to the initial injustice. I want to see a nation whose police officers approach protests without force or tear gas, but with a listening ear and with humility. So many people raise up MLK Jr. as a peacemaker whose nonviolence brought change. While I don't disagree, we must acknowledge what he said about violence and riots. He did not look at riots and start getting angry that people responded with such chaos. He fully understood that protests and riots alike were the language of the unheard. He said, "A riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. It has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity." Martin Luther King Jr. Our first response should not be outrage and surprise that riots and protests are happening all across the country and world. We must first stop to ask the question, what is it America has failed to hear? When we start with that question, our Black brothers and sisters feel loved and heard. I cannot fix the political system with merely my pen or poster sign at a protest or even this vlog. But I can elevate and acknowledge the words of the unheard voices. I can listen to my Black sisters vent about how tired and angry they are. I can acknowledge the Black fathers who feel the need to go on walks with their daughter and dog in order to feel safe from people assuming he's a threat. I can mourn and weep with those who feel as if their voices are constantly being silenced. I can boldly talk to my friends who are using language that is insensitive to Blacks and ask them to consider whether or not they are adding to the white privilege slogans or helping create a world where Black lives matter. I'm not perfect at this, and I desperately need God to soften my heart. I need God to give me a love for police officers who feel disrespected, grace for friends who post insensitive comments, and empathy for my Black brothers and sisters who experience injustice and brokenness on an entirely different plane than I do. I want to listen to all of you with a heart of humility and love. I want to repent of my fear of boldly speaking out or my fear of mourning with those who mourn. I'm sorry for not being as emotionally invested until now. Please forgive me for my ignorance, fear, and apathy. I want to hurt when you hurt. I want to fight when you fight. I want to speak up and speak out when you're too tired to. Thank you.